You're listening to Masonry Principles, your guide to building better buildings, with hosts Amanda Bedian and Phil Leden.
Thanks for listening. Today on Masonry Principles, we have Laura Merritt, who's a Senior Account Manager with Advancing Organizational Excellence, AOE, which is headquartered here in Farmington Hills, Michigan. AOE is a partner of the MIM, and they help us with all of our marketing, especially on social media, through our newsletters and things like that. So I'll turn it over to Laura if you just want to give us a little background on yourself, on AOE, and then we can get started.
Great. Thanks, Phil. And I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. A little bit about myself. I have been with AOE going on 2 years. Prior to that, I worked for many years in public relations, particularly in the area of social media. As far as what AOE offers our clients, we have many services that range from digital and traditional marketing, strategic planning, PR, crisis communications. We also do website development, graphic design, social media, of course, meetings and events. We also specialize in sustainability communications and diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and practices. So, whether it's the construction sector or the masonry industry, for all of our clients, they're going to benefit from working with a team of experts who possess those unique qualifications and perform our craft for a wide variety of leaders in the industries we serve. Now, because AOE's focus is so specialized in industrial markets, including construction and masonry, design, and more, we're able to establish those best practices for our clients. And those clients who do work with us on a consulting basis, they also benefit from working with professional writers, marketers, training professionals, and so on. And we know their industries and we know the marketplaces.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, so through the MM, I mean, Amanda and I share a lot of viewpoints when it comes to marketing and promotion. Because, I mean, from the get go and kind of what I think the MIM should be, is really we're a marketing and promotion organization. We're supposed to be selling masonry and growing our industry. And so, Laura and I have been working together for about a year and a half. During that time, she's mainly handled our social media marketing, newsletter campaigns, and we did revise our strategic business plan last year, which we're not going to spend a lot of time in this episode on strategic planning, though do think that's a really important area. But in terms of social media marketing and kind of just digital marketing in that landscape, I just wanted to ask, how is the masonry industry different than everyone else? You know, Laura, from your perspective, and then I'll ask Amanda from her perspective.
And that's a really good question, Phil, because one would think perhaps there aren't that many differences, but in actuality, marketing of masonry products and services is different from other industries. And that's because it's more focused on the aesthetic appeal, the labor intensive nature of the work, and the regionality of the industry. So when we look at masonry materials, they're often used specifically for their beauty and their durability, right? So when you're marketing those materials, you want to emphasize the qualities. You do that visually, certainly. So you want to have great pictures. You want to have video. Anything you can do that really capture the essence of what masonry materials offer. The masonry industry is also very labor intensive and more so than other construction industries. And what that means for the marketing aspect is you need to highlight the skill and craftsmanship of masons. And I don't think we do that nearly enough. So that's another area where I think we could really step things up. And then third, the masonry industry is typically more regional than other construction industries. This is because the availability of masonry materials is going to vary depending on the location. So marketing materials should be more locally focused. And one idea that we like to share is to partner with local organizations to promote masonry in the communities you serve. And it can be the associations in the area, it can be local chambers, and it can be charitable organizations, just to name a few.
Well, you did touch on two things, photos and videos, that I definitely want to come back to. But Amanda, I mean, your background's in marketing, obviously mine is not. And so, working as long as you have in this industry, I mean, what's different about masonry?
I think what's different is the audiences. Like we know we need to target architects and engineers and in the AE community, but then I firmly believe that we need to also reach out as for brand awareness to just the end user, the owners of these multifamily, buildings, not just the real estate developers, but like Joe and Sally who rent that apartment. It's this awareness of what masonry is coming back to, and I know Phil and I touched on this in one of our meetings a few years ago of like it's masonry is not the Masonic Lodge, it is not masonry, it's not called cinder block anymore. It's really just bringing an education piece to it outside of, educating architects and engineers on how to build better buildings and more robust buildings. But it is also, we always see with our eyes first, and it's we've got to sell it aesthetically. So you just need the perfect recipe. And I feel like we have all the ingredients. And now we just need to tweak of like what works and what doesn't work to get that perfect recipe out to the end users. Because we've all, I mean, we, you, me, we've all invested into different marketing campaigns, and always comes down to return on investment, right? Did that campaign actually reach the audiences that you're looking for? Sometimes you can absolutely gauge it and you have all the data to back it, and sometimes you don't really know until, a year later or a few months down the road. So it's like we just really need to take the time to share our story. And the story is super traditional, but at the same time, there's a reason that we built with masonry, and there's a reason we had so much market share all those years ago. But on the other hand, there's also a reason why we're fighting for space in the market. So there's a different ways we can go about it, but it all hits back to what Laura said, like visually selling the skills. It's a trade, it's a skilled trade, I should say. Every audience has a different story. The architects need to be more confident and more comfortable in designing with it. Why aren't they is a big question. And I think people, the outside end users, need to understand what masonry actually is to understand the beauty of it.
Yeah, kind of to piggyback off of what you're saying, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's really about telling that story. And it's a great story to tell. I mean, it's a very competitive industry. We're competing with other materials, concrete, steel, wood, for example. But we have a terrific story to tell, and we just need to, as an industry, do a better job in telling that story. And going back to what you said too, a lot of people don't even understand what the benefits of masonry are.
Exactly.
So, how can we tell a compelling story and educate?
Mhm. And as I think I said to Phil, I'm like, our story, and sometimes, and I get extremely frustrated and I'm very candid about it, but we've got this survival story right now. And instead of coming out of survival mode, I want us to be in thriving mode. And like going back to your regional, there are some areas of this country that are absolutely thriving in masonry. And then there's areas of the country that aren't. And it doesn't need to be survival anymore because there are so many benefits to it. It's getting the end user and that architect and the real estate developer and owner, and the owner really could be anyone. So that's why it gets really broad. Like you can paint with a really broad brush, or you can get really nichey and dial into it. So it's like, what story do you want to tell?
I certainly agree with both of what you have said. I mean, I don't have a marketing background. I did a little bit with prior companies, but I mean, to me, the difference with masonry is we're trying to sell a product that no one even knows what it is.
Right.
I mean, if I'm shopping for a car, I can go to different dealerships, but I know the function of a car. It has four wheels and it takes me from A to B. We're trying to sell a product that nobody even knows what we are in some areas. And I mean, in New York and in Michigan, I mean, we're basically penalized that we don't have raging wildfires and earthquakes. where it makes our material extremely easy to specify. But I mean, I think a lot of it goes down to education. I mean, we're trying to sell our product to architects that probably never even took a masonry course in school.
Well, it's so frustrating too because, like, you ask them what their favorite architecture style is, and it always goes back to masonry. Or if they, "Oh, I traveled in Europe," and you're like, "That's predominantly masonry." And then we come here and it's just so modernized material and in metal frames and metal, just metal buildings in general. Like, I got in an argument with somebody, "Why are we putting metal buildings in downtown districts? It doesn't even fit your aesthetic." And everyone's like, "Well, it's cheaper." Well, is it? Have you ever looked into what the masonry number would be to, match the integrity of the history of the city? It's getting them to think a little differently. That's where I get frustrated. You're not just selling it, you're trying to change the way they think about a material.
And trying to bust those myths.
Yes,
Oh, yeah, masonry is expensive. Well, how do you know? Have you looked into it? Well, no, but, you know, I read it somewhere or somebody told me that. So, that's also, I think, on us too, is to bust those types of myths.
right. We need an episode of Mythbusters and then
Yeah,
just
there
go
you go.
national. Maybe that's what we do with Chekhov, Phil.
Yeah, yeah.
And Phil, you mentioned something, I think, twice that I did want to circle back on. You said you don't have a background in marketing, but the thing is, you get it. And I think my point is that you don't need to have a background, a degree, whatever, years of experience in marketing to understand the basics. And it goes back to what you have touched on, what I think everyone on the in this conversation has touched on is it's really we have a great story to tell, so let's tell it, right?
Right, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I certainly don't have a degree in marketing, but I also check Instagram and follow pages that relate to what I like doing, even if it's home brewing or other things. And so, I mean, somehow we have to capture people's attention. And so I wanted to, I guess, go to my next issue of, I mean, what unique challenges do we have? And I'll start this by talking about it from my perspective, and then I'll go to Amanda and then Laura. But I mean, the challenges that I've personally faced at the MIM. I mean, when I started in my role here, I think we had 32 followers on LinkedIn. We have 150 members in the state of Michigan, but only 32 individual people found our content relevant. And largely, I mean, it's tough to come up with content. I mean, we try to post 3 times a week, and one of my biggest challenges is finding photos and videos. I mean, we've grown from 32 to I think 860 or something LinkedIn followers, mostly due to our relationship with AOE and their support. But I mean, we're struggling to find pictures, videos. I mean, everyone has a phone in their pocket these days. And if I had a nickel for every time I asked someone if they took a photo of this job they were just on, I'd be retired already. I mean, people go out to these beautiful projects, they sit there all day, they are on Facebook on their phone, looking at their high school crush or whatever, and they don't think to like take a picture of what they're looking at. And so, I mean, to me, that's the biggest challenge we have is finding that content because our industry does not do a good job at selling itself. We just don't. And I mean, we have to rework our mindset because that continues to be a challenge. Amanda, I'll turn it over to you, and then we can go to Laura. But I mean, what challenges do you have?
No, I absolutely piggyback content. It is so hard, like, because you can hit the ground running and you have a strong campaign, and then 3 months later, you're like, "This is gonna start getting repetitive." And you don't wanna be repetitive, you wanna be relevant. And you're only one person. You're only one person running MIM. I'm only one person running UMI. How do we get the content? And then you want to lean on the national organizations that I truly think should be the machines that are spitting out articles and content. And it's not the main focus. Research and development's a really big focus, but, like, just short articles, readable articles, not super technical, like, just getting us the short and brief information to keep the information going is I mean, 7 years later, it's still a problem of mine. Getting pictures, yeah. I mean, what contractors, and then they want you to contact the architect, and the architect doesn't wanna share the photo. It's like, what's the problem? We just wanna promote the picture. We wanna show how beautiful masonry is.
Yeah, and I think a really simple way, I think when I have something that I'm working on that I'm excited about, and I'm at a party, or I'm getting together with family, or somebody asks me in an elevator, um, "What are you working on?" And how do I present it to them? I obviously want them to think, "Wow, that's cool," right? So it's how do I tell the story about what I'm working on? And so no matter what the setting you're in, I think the same thing can apply. You want to tell them something that's interesting. You
Mhm.
want to keep it relatively brief, but something that's not super technical unless you're with an audience that is at that level. It's an extremely effective way of communicating, and it's really not that difficult to do if you just think in those terms.
Right, and I think it's the brief, like, we're no different than everyone's like the millennials and the Gen Zers. Us too, like, you get my attention for 4 seconds before I move on.
Right,
I can tell you from personal I can start reading something and not 4 seconds into, I'm like, "Nope, I don't wanna read it anymore." So, it's that instant gratification, it's cultivating or creating the again, going back to the ingredients in the recipe, you just need to make sure you're capturing them, and then it's leading the horse to water.
right,
Once you have them, then you can make it clickable, lead them to your website. Now you have analytics behind it. And now you can start building up your demographic, who's going to your website. So then you can start targeting with different campaigns, but that content is what is so important.
right. And the visual aspect really drives that, particularly in social media, but not limited to just social.
Oh, yeah, no, like, we got into OTT campaigns with your streaming services. We've gotten into video, both long format and short, broadcasting. What's nice about UMI is we're relatively newer, and with this fresh perspective of marketing, we really are willing to try anything and see what works. And now we have a better idea. What really worked for us in one of our campaign was geofencing. The thing with marketing is, like, the opportunities are endless. It just comes back and drilling home, and I hope national organizations are listening as far as giving us content because we can only create so much. They should have the powerhouses. They have the marketing teams and the writers and publications that, like, we're just not good at sharing that information. We gotta go looking for it, and it just doesn't prove on a regional level to be time efficient, I feel like. That's my frustration. If I have to go looking for it, it's already, like, a problem. I want it at my fingertips.
One of the things that you said, Amanda, that I really liked, was you said that you try different things and then you see what works,
Yeah,
right? And I think that that is really a key to success in marketing is not be afraid to try something new, but also, monitor and evaluate. And this is something, it's an ongoing process, but you see, a certain campaign worked. Great. You're going to do, similar type of campaign again because you know it works. You see another one didn't work. You say, okay, we're not going to try that again. Or if we are, we're going to be tweaking it a lot because it didn't give us a good return. So that's really important to always be monitoring the performance of your different campaigns and efforts to make sure that you're really hitting home every time.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that super quick because I think we're talking about a lot of really good stuff here. I think I talked about the need for photos and videos, but I mean that's a lack of support, I would say, in terms of a challenge. But the other challenge, Amanda, like you had noted, I mean, our national organizations, some of them aren't even active on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, they don't even have accounts.
right. So how do you lead the horse to water?
We're trying to get architects and engineers to use masonry. And I mean, I just literally, while we were talking about this, asked ChatGPT for some average ages. Architects and engineers are 40 years old on average. They're in that millennial age gap where they're using social media to get to the information. And I think if we continue to ignore that, that's why we keep seeing our material not being specified. We can't just, and I think it's a generational thing, but I mean, across the board, all of our masonry organizations are pretty dated and pretty old, and they're just unwilling to change. But the reality is right here. I mean, 40 years old is the average architect and engineer. They're not reading magazines and newspapers. They're getting their information online, and it's incredibly frustrating that we just nationally refuse to accept that.
I think there is an outlet for traditional marketing for sure, but I don't think that's where the belly of the money should go to. I think there's a lot more resources out there, and it's outside of like just online, but like traditionally, you're thinking publications and broadcasting and billboards, right? But we have so much more opportunity. And that's what blows my mind is how are we not relevant?
Yeah, I mean, and architects and engineers, they also attend conferences and workshops,
Yeah.
and they do attend some held by the MIM, Masonry Institute of America, NCMA, and so on. They go there to learn about new developments, right? Are we as an industry taking advantage of that? You talked about geofencing earlier. That's a great tool. Find out who's at these conferences and target them with advertising, social media, whatever campaign you want. But, the thing is, they're there. And are we taking advantage of their presence and really getting our messaging to them?
Yes, getting the messaging to them in the story because I ran a campaign where I wanted to target the architect engineer in the office, but then I also wanted to target them outside of those four walls. And because they're people too, right? Like who you are in your career isn't always necessarily who you are outside of work. Sometimes it crosses over, but it's kind of bringing that story outside of work to get you to again, it's about thinking differently, and then you go back to work Monday morning, you're like, "Oh, yeah, I saw this cool video," or "I saw this flyer," or whatever it may be, and that's where my challenge is with the technical aspect is I feel like Monday through Friday, they like the technical information and the relevancy with that kind of content, but that's not necessarily translating after 4 PM or, after the work hours. They're not looking for that on a Saturday afternoon when they're at a baseball game. Because we want them to think differently and get confident and comfortable with a material that they didn't learn anything about in college. And if they're not learning it in college and they're not learning it in the firm they're working for, like, how do we spark their curiosity? That's kind of been my uphill battle. I want to get them curious about it and not think that, like, oh, I know how to design in masonry. Well, if you know how to design in it, why aren't you designing in it?
Hmm.
And that's just my what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Yeah, so one thing I did want to touch on too is, I mean, so we've kind of undertaken this broad social media campaign at the MIM because I view it as critical. I don't want to look for another job in 10 years, and so I mean, AOE's done an outstanding job. I always get asked, well, what's the rate of return? What is this accomplishing? And so I mean, right before we started recording, I downloaded just our analytics since January 1 of 2023 to when we're recording, which is in May, and just in terms of our LinkedIn posts in 2023, we have already had 25,000 impressions on all of our LinkedIn posts, and we've had over 1,200 clicks on links that we've posted. I mean, our highest engaging post was almost 30%. And so, I mean, we have all the analytics that show that it's working. And that's when it gets really frustrating is we have all this data. We have proof that what we're doing makes sense, but I feel like it continues to be ignored. And so, I mean, that's to me, that's a big struggle with our industry. It continues to be just that we don't put enough emphasis on this.
Right.
And to add to that, this is where I think Phil and the MIM does a great job. Phil puts together an editorial calendar, is what we call it, for each month. So it's basically mapping out, here are the topics that we want to make sure we're touching on in our social media strategy for this month. It may be incorporating key events like Women in Construction Week or Small Business Week. It may be holidays or trends, helpful tips, insightful articles. There's a ton of material out there. It's just about kind of herding it all together and mapping it out for each month. When you have that strategy in place, it's going to really help as you're looking ahead. And what do I want to be talking about, not just in May, but in June and July and so on? It changes. Things come up and we move things, but I think that Phil does a great job with that. Also, the focus that he and the MIM have on bringing value to the members, I think is really to be applauded because, that's something Phil is always looking at. How can we promote our members and their projects, right? To help increase their visibility. So, this is something that whether you are an association or you're a business, if you're a business, you have customers, right? Is there an opportunity that you can be talking about your customers and promoting the project that you're working on? It's their project. You're promoting them. It's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, I agree, and then the projects turn into awards, and then it becomes this full cycle.
Right.
I appreciate that a lot, and I feel like there's so many things we can do in it. Like I said, it goes back to just being willing to try it and see what works and what doesn't. Because what works for me might not necessarily work for Michigan, and what works for Michigan might not work for California. But it comes back down to messaging. We are a fragmented industry because we still have a lot of regional hubs, and then we have our national hubs. And it's just, I feel like we've all getting on the same page, and we should be able to share information across regions because it's masonry, right? Masonry it's no different in Michigan than it is in New York. Maybe when it comes down to the design, but aesthetically, you're seeing is brick or stone or, we need a part 2 of this conversation because it feels like it could just go on and on
Yes.
because there's just so much opportunity there. And I think Phil and I are objective to talk about it is to have people think about it and see our different campaigns that we've run where I feel like Michigan's focused on social media, where I was focused more on different, just literally 3-month campaigns, 6-month campaigns, and it encapsulated a lot of different moving pieces. But we both see the value, and we want other groups to see the value in it because it's really important in staying ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. We probably need a part two at some point on this. I mean, we're right about at our time we're typically ending. I mean, Laura, do you have any final thoughts on just something quick someone can do to help themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it boils down to focusing on the benefits of masonry. It's durable, it's long lasting, it's beautiful, and it adds value, right? So when you're marketing your business, be sure to highlight those benefits of masonry and how it can benefit your customers. Use social media. I can't amplify that enough. Just quickly, I have to share that according to G2, 200 million social media users visit at least one business profile every day. That's just on social media. So if you're not out there talking about your business and the projects you're working on, you're missing out here with 200 million people a day.
That's a big market.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. I feel like we can continue this and maybe in a couple months we can circle back to some marketing, like specific campaigns, or I don't know, just something else to talk about as far as what's worked and what hasn't worked. Because I know I've got some pros and cons. I'm sure Phil has some pros and cons, but we really do appreciate your time.
Well, I again thank you for having me on, and I agree with you. This is a topic that could go on probably for hours. So we'll end it now, but I do look forward to coming back and talking more about it in a few months.
Fantastic. Well, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Laura. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And if you could do one thing, please just take your phone out of your pocket and take a picture.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Masonry Principles. To continue the conversation, be sure to reach out to us by visiting masonryprinciples.com.